Travels of the Ellis Arbor is an audio narrative set in the world of Bastion using 5e compatible characters. A dark fantasy world with chaos, intrigue, magic, and mystery. The story, setting, and sounds are written by Lonomy and published by lonomy.creative. Tune in for episode 7, Flood. The sharp sound of a cocked and aimed pistol was all that stayed Edward's rush toward the open door. Between him and his exit, the soft, dripping sound emanating from an unknown source barred his escape from the vacant kitchen. It was a fear that pressed into the back of his mind, a dissonance that both wanted to flee and wanted to turn to face the unknowable horror. Nout also had his gaze averted, but with a look of sheer displeasure and discomfort. He had seen whatever drew to the corner of his eye, and his all-too-knowing stare gave Ed more reason to stay put. Briefly, the tense moment passed, until the pitter-patter of droplets upon the wood floor were coupled with a low, gurgling growl. It started softly at first, rolling as a cat's purr within a reflective chamber, growing and growing into a snarl and a voracious bark. Then, from the corner, a dim blue flash. 3 pairs of vacant eyes now glowed with an unnatural, hollow light, illuminating the corpses of the 3 engorged rats that Nout had slain moments before. The writhing and sickly twisted, turning bodies of these sewer rats began to turn the stomachs of both Edward and Nout. They could do little to rise from their corner, their bodies punctured and immovable by the force of Nout's magic. Even so, the rousing chorus of growls, howls, and gurgles made short work of the tension within the vacant kitchen. And as the chorus reached its crescendo, a moment where Ed was certain that the creature would leap upon him, the shot was fired. A swift, explosive thud as a bullet slammed into the reverse side of the gurgling creature. Its garbled cry was silenced, choked by the incendiary and instantaneous blast. Covering their ears, Nout, Ed, and Darian could only hear their labored breaths, and the soft pitter-patter of water droplets once more. The creature, no taller than a young teen, seemed covered in a wet, aqueous substance. Algae and barnacles encrusted their overclothes and bare skin. Where these adornments met flesh, a pallid and ghastly blue substance formed and oozed from within. The clothes and hair damp and disheveled. What's more, as Edward finally turned to meet the ghastly silhouette, he covered his mouth as he saw the same dim blue light leave what were otherwise 2 very fragile and very beautiful eyes. A series of bewildered, expository moments passed before the young girl slumped to the floor with a heavy, wet thud. At this point, likely to the sound of a familiar gunshot and the intrepid vaulting over the upper floor banister, a less disheveled Carpathian and a curiously chipper Moor joined the crew and witnessed the display of algae, brine, blood, and barnacles near the kitchen threshold.
It would seem our host was less forthcoming of the kind of travellers they permit entry into their hearth. This one appears under some kind of curse. What say you, Captain? Is this the curse of the acolyte's making? Or perhaps it is merely a permitted perversion within these halls?
The captain remained silent, his eyes drawn to the now lifeless body of a young girl on the wooden floor, her form slumped forward and away from him, He could make out a faint, darkened etching beneath her hairline. Just below where her hair met her neck, a symbol now began to burn into the pallid flesh. One of a crescent moon and a vial of crimson brew, at the center of concentric rings of arcana. A symbol he was all too familiar with. His right hand now tapped the side of his hammer, running his fingers over the very same sigil that adorned its head. The mark of eternal death, an omen of the Lady of Blood.
I would not be so concerned, wizard. The Lady of Blood has granted peace to this child. Whatever curse that lay upon her body, it is broken. It is a kind of magic we are all too well equipped to deal with.
He pondered for a moment. Had their journey been for this task? Were there undead vessels or perpetrators of necromantic magic within these halls? It had seemed all too convenient for this to be the one and only harbor they would find purchase. Indeed, the Lady of Blood was fickle, and would not grant him a boon without first attributing a tithe.
If there are, indeed, more of these creatures about, I can't imagine why the Acolyte would have allowed us sanctuary without so much as a warning. I didn't think entering their kitchen would be so wrought with such a malicious display.
Perhaps this one was here, behind the door, and we simply woke her. I cannot imagine that Adeline meant for us to go exploring.
I wouldn't be so certain of that, my green friend. We are adventurers, are we not? And adventurers are wont for curiosities and secrets. No, I fear that she meant for us to find this girl. Or, perhaps, for her to find us.
Darian thought for a moment longer, thinking on their host, the girl, the chapel, and the converging pathways of their predicament. Perhaps Edward was right. They were not meant to find this horrible secret hidden away within an empty cellar. Though his experience of such dark magics and terrible omens had him believing the words of Carpathian, a fact he was not overly eager to share with the crew.
Whatever the reason or the predicament, we have a reason to search further. I have no want to rest while creatures of this kind writhe unannounced. Perhaps we can find answers of our own. Answers that I am certain Adeline would not be so pleased to grant us.
Gathering what nerve remained, Nout, Edward, Darian, and Carpathian made their way to the center of the chapel, meeting with their mushroom companion in front of the garish stone altar. More had already been set to work, sending their spores throughout the chamber in hope of finding a trapdoor or a concealed pathway. With their luck, the spores returned to their body and more waddled toward a partially hanging curtain just beyond the altar. Drawing it back, the group now saw what looked to be a roughly painted door, hinged with brass and with a simple nameplate upon its surface. Chapel Cellar. The crew now gathered. They made for the revealed door and pressed into what they hoped would be an answer to their current quandary. His pistol at the ready, he turned the handle of the wooden door, creaking as it swung freely from its hinges. A faint light began to emanate from the chamber beyond, evoking a gaslight lantern hanging freely from the ceiling just below the entrance. The entryway dipped downward, quite suddenly, into a series of stairs that led below the chapel and into what they hoped would be a well-stocked cellar. And the captain crept forward, carefully making his way down the steps and into the hidden chamber. As his foot hit the floor below, it sunk into what seemed like a dusty stone surface, but was a sodden, murky pool of water that filled the bottom of the chamber. Taking the lantern with his free hand, he held it aloft into the cellar, scrying the darkness beyond. It appeared as though the entire cellar had been flooded, and flooded for some time. As his boots hit the sodden, submerged interior, they sent ripples through the leaden pond that filled the chamber, disturbing what had been a long, stagnant flow. And at his movement, the room seemed to respond by creating rippling waves of its own. Travels of the Ellis Arbor is made possible by the generous support of our subscribers, followers, and most notably, our patrons. Thanks to Rob Jenkin, Nathan Ebley, and Ensign Turtle for supporting us so far on this journey. Please subscribe, give a like or a comment, follow us on Twitter, and stay tuned for the next episode. Don't forget, take care of each other.